Greetings, Earthlings! Welcome back to 7th Street.
Oh! You nasty child! Out of my kitchen!
Bless me, Father, for I have sinned. It has been 2 weeks since my last referenced this film episode. So let's talk about Alice, Sweet Alice. Any die-hard movie fan would tell you that sometimes you just stumble upon a movie serendipitously and it strikes a nerve. You find yourself looking around asking, why isn't this movie more popular? That was exactly the reasoning for creating this series. Alice, Sweet Alice may very well embody that statement more than any other movie that I've reviewed on Reference This Film. Although not my favorite film that I've reviewed, one could make the argument that, top to bottom, this film is a masterpiece and should be a lot more mainstream than it is. Alice, Sweet Alice is a Reference This Film and a half.
Liar! Liar! You're all liars! I'm not lying! I'm not lying!
Our story begins with creepy little preteen Alice, who right away we notice something is up with her. Not only does she ruthlessly bully her younger sister Karen, played by a very young Brooke Shields, by dressing up as the creepiest slasher villain of all time, but she also has a knack for hurting her fellow students and making it look like an accident. Alice relishes in taunting all the authoritative figures in her life. She disobeys her domineering aunt, refuses to participate in church activities, and routinely mocks the weight of the building's landlord that she resides in.
It wasn't that serious until recently. Anyway, they weren't really sure exactly what should be blamed on Alice. She has a knack of making things look like accidents. Thought I could handle it myself. I used to talk a lot with her, but lately she's set up a barrier.
And as someone who was raised in the Catholic Church, a lot of this might hit me a lot more than it might hit others. The themes of obedience, guilt, and sexual repression are very strong with this one. Right in the opening scene, Alice and her mother Catherine and younger sister Karen are visiting with the young priest Father Tom at his rectory to discuss Karen's upcoming First Holy Communion. Alice startles the rectory's housekeeper, Mrs. Tredani, by wearing a bizarre translucent mask, the same one that she terrorizes her younger sister Catherine with. Then later in the family's apartment, Alice takes Karen's communion veil and models it for herself in the mirror, further antagonizing her little sister.
She's ruining my veil! Make her take it off! Take your sister's veil off. Make her take it off, Mommy!
It's right about at this point that we recognize Alice is a bit of a problem child. Things go from bad to worse on the day of Karen's communion, where she is attacked by a figure in a yellow rain slicker and wearing the same mask that Alice wears. The strange figure strangles Karen, then puts her body in a hollow bench before setting it on fire. Alice then appears among the younger girls in Karen's place, wearing her veil, awaiting her First Holy Communion. Shortly after, a nun notices the smoke and discovers Karen's body, while Alice slips Karen's veil into her pocket, with the rest of the congregation being none the wiser.
She's dead! Let's go! She's dead! Karen's dead! She's dead!
Distraught over the loss of her youngest daughter, Catherine has her sister Annie stay with her and Alice, which stirs up more tension, seeing as that Annie holds some resentment towards Alice due to the fact that she was conceived out of wedlock. Annie is then shortly attacked by a mysterious figure wearing the same yellow rain slicker and mask, seriously wounding her with a large kitchen knife. I do consider myself somewhat of a gorehound, but I will say, there's just something about this scene that makes me wince every time I watch it. It's just so effective in the way that it was shot and edited, and it really makes this sequence a lot more graphic than it actually is.
Later at the hospital, Annie obviously identifies her attacker as Alice, sending Catherine's world into further chaos as suspicion from the local police turn to her daughter. This brings her estranged father home to assist in the investigation, where Alice is subjected to a psychological exam that suggests Allison is a schizophrenic and possibly dangerous. Later that night, Dominic, Alice's father, and Catherine have a quiet moment back at Catherine's apartment when Catherine gets a strange phone call consisting of nothing but breathing. We see the caller on the other end is wearing the same translucent mask, and it's at this moment that the audience realizes all might not be as it once seemed, and the disturbed little Alice may not be the killer after all.
Why won't you talk to me? I'm your mother.
I have nothing to talk about.
Well, you had plenty to say to Dr. Whitman. Why didn't you tell me you had your period?
Why doesn't everybody just leave me alone?
Leave you alone? Don't you know that I love you? You're on my mind every minute.
Take this, you know it's not mine.
Dominic then returns to his own hotel room where he receives a phone call with a sobbing voice that identifies herself as Angela, his niece, saying that she ran away from home and needs Dominic to come and help her. He goes to an abandoned building that the voice instructed him to go to, and he sees a figure in a yellow raincoat and mask. When he follows her into the building, she attacks him with a large kitchen knife and bludgeons him repeatedly with a brick. In a truly haunting sequence, Dominic awakens from his oblivion and realizes he's about to fall to his death. Just then, the killer removes the mask, revealing that it's Mrs. Trelawney underneath. She explains that her reasoning for all of this is that she knows Alice was conceived before Dominic and Catherine were married, and it goes against the beliefs of the Catholic Church.
Religious fanaticism, terrifying in any genre.
Dominic screams for help, but the area is too desolate for anyone to hear him. He uses his teeth to grab the crucifix that Mrs. Trelawney wears, the same one that she pulled from little Catherine's body the day she was killed. Mrs. Trelawney notices this and uses a brick to try to smash in Dominic's teeth. He refuses to give up the cross, so she pushes him over the ledge to his death. Seeking forgiveness, Mrs. Trelawney returns to the church and enters the sanctuary during service, making her way to where Alice and Catherine are sitting. During communion, Alice, Catherine, and Mrs. Trelawney all come up to the front to receive communion, but when Father Tom skips Mrs. Trelawney, instead leaning toward her and asking quietly for her to go with the police, Mrs. Trelawney becomes indignant and shouts,
But you give it to that whore!
She pulls out the large kitchen knife and fucking stabs him through the throat. The congregation reacts in horror, but Alice remains curiously detached from what's happening. Alice, still not ever having received her first Holy Communion, walks out of the church with the knife in her hand and smiling to herself.
Oh boy, this is quite the deep and complicated film. There's a lot more going on here than initially meets the eye.
First and most obvious is that although the film revolves around Catholicism, a religion known for its misogyny, the story almost completely centers around women. Strong women. From Alice to Annie to Mrs. Trelawney, the women in this film are not only diabolical, but very intelligent. While almost every male character in this film is portrayed as the weaker species, even when they're not victims of the violence, like in the case of Annie's weenie of a husband, the women always seem to have the upper hand.
Ellie, why'd you have to start this? I think you've gone too far.
Shut up, I know what I'm doing.
Director Alfred Soul really seems to have something to say here and goes on the attack on organized religion and its effects on women, the community, and especially sexuality and how it controls the masses. There seems to be an anger toward the general ignorance of the religious community and the mob mentality that it creates. I'd like to think that as someone who attended Catholic Church during my adolescence, I appreciate the portrayal of the insanity of religion and the need to punish all sinners in this movie more than others might. Every scene in this film is filled with some kind of symbol, a crucifix, a portrait of Jesus, and not to mention, of course, the entire moral of the story. Mrs. Trelawney's quote,
Don't you see? He waited until then to teach me that children pay for the sins of their parents. And then I was sent here to look after Father, not you.
The exaggerated portrayals of Catholicism only work to make this movie that much more brilliant. If you haven't seen this one, do yourself a favor and pick up the new Arrow Blu-ray and reference this film.
Yeah, but she wasn't lying. So what do you want from me? It's obvious the kid is off the wall.